We have a good amount of people here now, and so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm excited to kick it over to Brooks and let him introduce the panelists. But as you'll hear from Tim in the chat here, he's happy to answer any questions as they come up. But without further ado, Brooks, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chase. And thank you all for taking the time here to join us this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're calling in from. But we're really looking forward to today's conversation. For those who have not met, my name is Brooks Bush. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Elate. And we're really looking forward to the discussion here today because one of the things that we found here over the last 5+ years that we've been building Elate is there's a lot of different industries and markets in which we serve, but one of our favorites is the higher education space. When we get the opportunity to come alongside institutions trying to bring together long-standing vision, decades and decades of history, and marry that with execution in the here and now, especially with all of the changes taking place within the current landscape, that's where we get really excited because it's that bridging of long-term vision with tactical execution, which is why we built Elate in the first place. And so we've got a panel here of 4 experts in the strategy and operations space, specifically in higher education. And so we had so many requests to tailor a discussion around higher ed. Again, amidst all of the change and uncertainty that is currently going on. And we've pulled this great panel together here today. And I'm not going to steal the thunder of all the individuals and their introductions, but I would love to have everyone, if you don't mind, go around and just quickly introduce yourselves, maybe the institution you're with, your role at that institution before we dive in. And Rob, if you don't mind, I'll hand it over to you to kick things off.
Sure thing. Thanks, Brooks. I'm Rob Schneiders, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Fairfield University. And Chase, I'm trying to figure out where the Little Giants are from. I thought I knew every mascot, but we're the Stags, a private Jesuit Catholic university in the Northeast, undergraduate and graduate with growing demand for both. One of the things we'll talk about, I'm sure, is the way that context shapes your strategy and some of your operational approach. And certainly the case as we look across higher ed, there's a variety of different institutions with different purposes, and it'll be interesting to tease out how that influences. So I have direct oversight over our graduate online programs, but really work across the university on around the corner kinds of initiatives for us.
I can go next. So my name is Chris Lumpton. I am the Canadian on the panel. I am the manager of strategic initiatives at DeGroote School of Business, which is at McMaster University. Our mascot is a marauder, so another eagle in the house. I joined DeGroote about 3 years ago, just as it was exiting the pandemic and drafting that post-pandemic strategy. After a career in higher ed consulting, I really wanted to see what it would be like to be on the inside. And to the point earlier, moving from providing the strategy to also pushing through that execution and really seeing it come to life. And all the uncertainty around the pandemic just, I think, continues with new challenges that we get to solve every day.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here with strategy and operation experts. My name is Chuck Hammond, Vice President for Operations and Planning at Goldie Beacon College, small private institution in Wilmington, Delaware. Been at the college for about 20 years. I have a unique pathway into my role. Started off in athletics as an athletic director, then moved over to the student affairs side as the dean of students, and now leading our operations and strategy teams from facilities, IT, legal, HR, auxiliary services, and also our strategic planning operation here at the college. So it's been great working with Elate, and I'm really excited for the conversation moving forward. Thank you.
I'm Jocelyn Lewis. I am the Vice President of Institutional Effectiveness, Advancement, and Strategic Initiatives here at Camden County College in the southern part of New Jersey, about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. Our mascot is a cougar as well. I think somebody else in the chat had that. My pathway to higher ed has had its ups and downs and lefts and rights. I have a non-traditional trajectory into higher education. I'm actually a physical therapist and a licensed one, and I had a practice up until COVID, and was also teaching as a faculty member at a community college. My passion is for community colleges. And as COVID struck us, started thinking about ways that I could change the landscape of an institution. And I came into this institution in 2023, just as their strategic plan was expiring. And so had the opportunity to not only be the author and a member of the writing team, but really being the one to facilitate the revision and recreation of our mission, our vision, and all of the things that we need to help us thrive. I do directly oversee our strategic plan, and I philosophically believe that strategic planning isn't just about survival, it is really about thriving in an evolving educational environment.
Thank you all. And I think, Jocelyn, you set it up perfectly to segue into the conversation and keeping it at the highest of levels to start. And we can certainly dive in from there. There's been a lot of changes. And I think even before the last few months and a lot of, we'll say, executive orders or government changes that are being invoked, higher education has been over the last few years undergoing a lot of changes, market conditions, student enrollment, things along those lines. And I think one of the elements that's certainly coming into fruition with that is the way in which institutions go about strategic planning itself. And I think at a high level, one of the things we've heard quite a bit is just the shift from longer range planning, maybe 7 years or 10 years, into more condensed timeframes. But I'll leave it a bit open-ended. Would love to hear how you all at your institutions think about strategic planning, what that process looks like, and if there are specific changes or ways in which you've maybe iterated on that process to match the current landscape itself.
I can jump in. Okay.
Yeah.
So for us, we were coming in, again, I started in 2023, 2022, just as the strategic plan was ending, and it was written at that time as a 3-year plan. Convenient for me that, thank goodness, it wasn't some long-term plan, because who knew, right, that a pandemic would strike us and we'd have to be able to pivot pretty quickly. I think I have the benefits of COVID, if there were a benefit at all. It's the fact that the strategic plan was expiring and needed to be rewritten. So I took the stance that we needed to ensure that our mission was aligned with who we are and who we want to be. I challenged the stakeholders to consider Time Magazine. And in 5 years, if we had the opportunity to be on the cover of Time Magazine, what would we want it to say about us? We looked at our mission alignment. We certainly looked at our resource allocation. I wanted to ensure that stakeholders were absolutely engaged in the process. And we not only had faculty and staff, but we had members from our board of trustees. We had community members involved, everyone from local government, and our students, right? Because they're really our focal point. And then we used data to really help drive our decisions and ensure that our goals were properly designed, and things that, while I told them to think about shooting for the stars, if money were no object, ideally, how would we look in 5 years? And then we walked that back a bit to say, okay, now what financial resources do we need in order to really bring this to fruition? And then certainly considering institutional sustainability.
Yeah, I think Brooks, I can go next on that. If we think about strategic planning, whether it's for accreditation or various sorts of constituencies, like ours is really a 7-year arc on the macro. And part of that is, if you think about the student journey, that student is influencing students that came before them and behind them. And that for us has been a really useful time span to think about. When we talk about strategy, there's a book that's been around for a while that I think it's Kaplan and Norton, the Strategy Focused Organization. And when they looked at kind of breakthrough performance, more often that was attributable to execution versus kind of really unique strategy. So that's really what we try to lean in on. We've got 3 sort of evergreen themes that we're running at, which are, promoting human flourishing, delivering on academic excellence, and really expanding access to different populations and different geographies. So, the sets of activities that are under each of those could change from year to year, but our focus is really on making sure that we're translating to action. And I think that's where, different universities are either more federated or have kind of more alignment. But that to me is one of the really interesting and fun challenges about strategy execution.
And I think Rob raises a strong point in that in order to be ambitious, you need to break out of that 3-year, 5-year framework, right? Even if you just need a new building to raise space, the planning just for the fundraising is going to take you 3 to 5 years. And then construction, depending on where you are, is another 3 to 5. So We have found that having that longer term plan with the vision, and then pairing that with operational achievements and iterative reflection has allowed us to balance the overarching vision, that ambition, with the ground level execution that's required to deliver on it. So when you go short, you don't want to lose the ambition, because the ambition is what's driving us forward.
And that's a great point. We kind of went a little bit different direction. I remember my first experience working with a strategic plan and being part of the process. It was a 10-year strategic plan. And I remember a colleague joking and saying, using the term set it and forget it. Just remember what to write down for assessment purposes at the end of the year. And it was kind of tongue in cheek, but at the same time, we've gone through different iterations in terms of the time for our plans. Right now, we're in a 3-year type of bridge strategic plan that we just launched, Vision 2028. And it really is flexible enough where we have a lot of international students. Over 70% of our graduate program are made up of international students. And so when there's regulatory changes, some external factors that we can adjust quickly. But like Rob said, it all comes down to the execution, making sure that we are setting our sights long-term, the success of the institution. So while it's a 3-year bridge plan for us, we're definitely thinking the next 5-10 years in terms of planning.
So everybody's touched on this, and I'd love to press in a little bit further, because I think it's one thing to say, hey, we want to be dynamic, we want to take action as needed on the course to that vision or to that strategy itself. But how all have you built in to your process a rhythm or cadence to go about evaluating and making changes in the interim or in the more short term? Again, sometimes these are going to be dependent upon changes that are coming at the macro level. Sometimes it's just evaluating internal situations and needing to deviate. But how have you all built in successfully, or cases where you haven't done that well, the right structure or rhythm to introduce change?
One feature of academia that is certainly the annual kind of academic calendar. And I think that very few businesses, if you want to call it a business, right, have that level of predictable cadence to the operations and the kinds of things that are going to come up. You layer into that then, Brooks, the patterns around, say, enrollment and the revenue associated with that. There's a lot of things in higher ed that if you miss it by a couple of months, you could be waiting for a year to reload properly on it. And so it's a matter of thinking about when certain of these things must come in, and then backdating from there as much as possible to figure out, okay, what are the precursory steps to that? Because if you kind of miss that window, it could be a multi-year catch up.
And so our approach has been to have a sense of where we're going in the next 5 years, straw man, straw person pathway of how we will get there, and then an annual cycle of reviewing where we are, what we might prioritize differently, and how we might achieve that outcome through different ways. A lot of our strategies have a assumed way of getting there, but there are other pathways that we could pursue, maybe smaller, maybe larger, if we wanted to. I think the point around governance is an important one, and it's been my lesson moving from a high-paced world into one of calendared dates. How do you make that governance process your friend in order to drive those priorities and drive that change? So I know that in order to achieve a whole bunch of things for fall of 2026, I need to be on the governance calendar for November. And so what resources do I need now in order to develop those activities, and how can I pull people in so that momentum builds over the summer term? So that has been our approach, is that iterative reflection and then adjustment. And we've been lucky in that our values have been aligned. And so despite some changes in the landscape, we can continue to pursue those values and those achievements independent. Maybe the impact will be a bit less, but we can continue to pursue them.
I'll share that we took the approach. I introduced this concept of baking a cake. And I said that strategic planning initially was us just gathering the ingredients together, right? But we're not really sure if we actually have a cake yet. We just have the ingredients. We have all the goals. We have all the objectives and things, but we need to check in on the cake, right? Once you mix it all together and stick it in the oven, we need to do some updates, right? Some check-ins. And I think that that's that iterative refinement that Christopher was just referring to. So quarterly, we go in, and right now we're using a late, and we update and make sure that the ingredients are actually coming together to form a cake, right? And that we're not going to end up with muffins or donuts or something else, right? We started out trying to make a chocolate cake. That's still the direction that we want to be headed in, right? So every quarter we're going in and we're making sure that every stakeholder is aware of where we are in this cake baking process, right? In the strategic planning process. And we publish all of that information on our website so that everyone clearly knows where we are and that we're still focused on making the cake, right? And if we have to pivot because, hey, the cake sort of looks like it's starting to shape shift a little bit and it's looking more like a muffin, we want to be transparent in that part of the conversation. And we do that every quarter, right? We provide that update to everybody who has a role in it. And anyone from the public is able to log on to our site and see where we are.
And for us, the transparency is critical. So making sure that we are sharing that direction and the KPIs and how we measure the tactics and making sure that they're going to be executed in a way that leads to achieving that goal. For us, though, we really had an insular type of approach. We never really looked too much externally at the environment outside of our college. And Delaware is a very small state. Over half of the private institutions, higher ed institutions in the state, have closed within the past couple of years. So I believe part of our approach now is also making sure that we're watching externally and trying to find what are the strategic partnerships that align with what we're trying to accomplish on our campus and find those partners as well.
And I do want to come back, Jocelyn, to your analogy of baking the cake and making sure we're still baking the cake. And Rob, it ties into what you were sharing thematically and how you all think about 3 themes that guide a lot of the direction for the institution, but maybe just holding on this topic you just brought up, Chuck. I know you had shared 50% of private institutions in Delaware have gone by the wayside. I know Goldie Beacom also has a large portion of foreign exchange international students themselves. Like internally, you mentioned there's the internal focus and what are we doing? There's also now probably an added external focus around just executive orders and how those come into play. And so how do you set up that right structure to where you do stay focused, you stay aligned on, hey, here's what we're setting out to build, our vision, our mission as an institution, but ensuring that you have a wide top of funnel, you're taking in a lot of information and deciphering in an effective way what's noise versus what is signal that we need to be paying attention to.
And I think it really comes down to institutional philosophy, your values. Having a diverse student body, I think, is really part of everyone's ethos and our DNA and who we are. But for us, we are such a diverse campus. We know that really enriches the entire experience for all of our students. So I think it's making sure that we're monitoring, not overreacting, because I think that's an approach as well that can happen. You have to be responsive. You have to be able to adjust and have different plans for different scenarios. So having that type of scenario planning in place that you can pivot when needed, but really trying to stay firm on who you are and what you believe in as an institution.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things we were even talking about ahead of time, we were just talking about some of the changes and some of the legislation here in the US. And Chris, you had an interesting or unique perspective because you're based in Canada. And so there are some things that you said you saw, and you get to be a little bit of an outsider looking into some of the things going here. But I'm just curious, like for you all and how you go about these decisions, how you think about things and your world, like, are there parallels? Are there challenges that you're seeing now US-based institutions go through that maybe you all have already gone through or overcome or seen a way in which to navigate some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think a lot of our challenges are the same, and that we are largely publicly funded institutions. In Ontario, our tuition has been capped for a number of years, and that creates financial pressures. And we are lucky to work in institutions where individuals want to do as much as they can because they recognize the impact that they can have on students' lives. And so if I could just have access to this, or if I could just build this in, the outcomes at the end of the degree would be so much stronger. But we can't, because it is a tied resource that we can't engage. I think where the opportunity lies is, how do we, one, think creatively, and two, think collaboratively? So where can we engage in partnerships to provide access to opportunities that we might not otherwise engage in? And how do we move our strategic planning away from a sort of insular view, we will do this ourselves, to we will achieve this goal by working cross-border with another school that might be really strong in this competency, and move forward together. I think that the environment forces a scarcity mindset on us, and we can get stuck in that trap. But if we realize that there is no edge to the pie, and if we collaborate, we can sort of exceed what we would think the pie would be. It can drive us forward. Sorry, I moved from cakes to pies.
No, I like it. I'm more of a pie fan myself than cake, so I'll go with this. But I've not heard that used before, of the edge of the pie. So I'm going to steal that one, Chris. And I think, and this ties back to the collaboration and ensuring that folks are rowing in the right direction and staying focused on, hey, here's what we're trying to achieve together, and that bigger vision. And going back to Rob, you introduced this when you shared the 3 themes or pillars in which Fairfield operate under, and Jocelyn, you spoke to this as well, of knowing, hey, we're baking a cake, not muffins, not donuts. This is what we're focused on. We talk a lot about this at Elate, of being able to have those anchors that folks can come back to within a strategy, knowing that the way in which you go about executing this strategy, that might differ depending on new variables that enter into the equation, but we still know what those anchors are. We know where we want to go towards. And so if you all don't mind just sharing the impact you've seen in being a bit more thematic at that top level, setting those pillars, setting those themes, and how that's had an impact on your all's faculty and direction, would love to hear that anecdotally.
So one of the things that we realized after we introduced our plan was that the connection between the faculty and the plan did not exist. And so we were consistently hearing, I was involved in crafting the plan. They recognized all of those activities, but I don't see myself in the final product. And they were very much looking at what the action items associated with the plan were and who owned those items. And so we broke it out. We did roundtable discussions, some posted exercises, and said, this is the theme. This is the initiative that we want to do. How does it tie back to you? And so all of a sudden, our finance team started seeing themselves in the teaching and learning category. Our academic teams, our advising teams started seeing themselves in the operational excellence category. All of the silos in the institution and our faculty started falling down, because people saw how the siloed view of the plan excluded them. But as soon as they removed that silo, they started engaging. And so those themes, I think, are an opportunity to build cohesion, to step out of the mindsets that we currently have, and to allow new ideas to percolate around those opportunities.
I'll jump in. We focused on 4 strategic directions. They were recruitment, retention, reclamation, and realization. We felt like regardless of what comes our way, those are the 4 R's, as we call them, that we need to be really focused on. And by doing that, as an entire institution, we approached strategic planning as an institution-wide initiative, right? And so by doing that, we felt like it was going to heighten the awareness and the strength of our institution. It would help individual departments refine their mission and their organization as to how they're tied into the plan as a whole, because everyone can buy into at least one part, if not all, of the 4 R's, right? Student affairs can buy into recruitment, and institutional advancement can tie into all 4 of those things, right? Because we're responsible for some of that fundraising and things and marketing. So everybody at the college could buy into some portion of it, right? Academics could buy into reclamation and realization. Are we going to help students persist to graduation and persist to completion? And are we going to reclaim students who have some college but no degree, right? Are we going to utilize prior learning assessment to get them back on campus? So we made it in a way with those 4 strategic directions that helped us to really have a stronger institutional identity. And it's one that everybody can get behind and grab on to some piece of an R and have that buy-in.
For us, Elate really helped us be able to forge this pathway forward. We just launched our plan, announced it at the college community with different events and activities, community days, mission days, trying to get that engagement and participation across different key stakeholders across campus. When we were working with Elate, though, what we found was, are there ways that we can still have strategic plans for our different units across campus where they're working toward their set goals that feed into larger goals of the institution? And that's really what we were able to really accomplish here using Elate, which was take all that some of it's operational, but strategic and operational work that's happening across different units across campus, and then form them in. We have 5 imperatives for our plan, but how do they fit into those imperatives in a way that you don't have thousands of different tactics across the institution, because every unit has a lot of different work that they're working on, and that's very important to them. We just tried to make sure that we delivered a pathway for unit plans to be able to connect and align with the strategic plans of the institution.
I think also by having a consistent set of themes that are very empowering and animating, you can make strategy really everyone's job and far much more ongoing. If we take our theme around access, for us, that means new learners in ever more innovative ways, right? So that in a 2-year time span can turn into a new nursing program in Austin, Texas that we launched, or, a highly subsidized associate's degree program in a neighboring city. But we're always asking ourselves that question, okay, but what about after that, right? Knowing that access is going to remain a consistent theme, let's think forward, right? And not just us being some selected set of folks, but really anyone that, I think that the downside of it could be is, I suppose folks would want to justify a particular initiative by saying, okay, it's linked to this, and it's so it is for us. It's like important that it starts with a theme and then leads to a set of activities, and not the other way around.
Yeah, we see a lot of folks fall into the trap of a culture driven by or value oriented around how long is my to-do list? How many activities do I have on my schedule versus is this aligned to the vision? What type of impact is this objective that I'm saying yes to? What is that going to have on the institution? Because in doing so and empowering folks to say yes, you're also just as much empowering them to say no to other things that ultimately, yes, they could have a line drawn to a theme, but it's just about as much giving permission to say no to things as it is to say, this is what we're going to be focusing on. And I think this ties into one other thing that we oftentimes see as a challenge for organizations and institutions, which is getting all of the necessary parties or stakeholders involved and engaged in this process versus feeling as though it's just a top-down driven, we're handing you this strategy, this is what it is, good luck. It's, okay, how do we ensure we're bridging and in a collaborative way the way in which our strategy and direction is built, but also making sure that folks feel like they're a part of that process. And so I'm curious if anyone has seen some things that have gone well in that engagement and also things that have maybe not gone as well in the past.
I think, Brooks, I don't know that I have something succinct and compelling on this. I think when you asked that question, I found myself thinking about the life cycle of planning and execution and how people are legitimately brought into those different phases. If the plan is perhaps developed in isolation, I think the challenge then is going to be, where do I see myself in this? And and kind of a buy-in problem. But even if it was an entirely inherited plan, right? Like if folks didn't have any opportunity to really influence it, I think it's not too late to figure out, I think there's got to be some probing, some questioning, some opportunities for people to kind of push and pull on the suggested execution. But I don't think it necessarily forestalls buy-in or efficacy necessarily.
And I think we did a good job at pulling people together to inform the plan and to prioritize the plan. I think where we have an opportunity is how do we bring new people into the organization into that plan? So we could probably do a better job at sitting down, walking through how the plan got here, and then explicitly empowering someone to engage with it moving forward. We walk them through it and talk about it at a high level, but that permission to contribute might be important when you're entering a new organization and just trying to figure out what your role would be in the first 60, 90 days.
It's a yeoman's work to get everyone on board. I'll say honestly, we came from a place where we were using like an Excel spreadsheet when I first came in, and I started asking questions like, what does this symbol mean in the box, right? Because there just wasn't enough space to expand upon what was happening in each area. Then I tried to create like a PDF document where people could fill in some information, but then everyone can't see what's happening. So I'm writing all this great stuff, but in my area, but 3 areas away, they have no idea as to what we've done. So I'll say honestly that Elate has really helped us to streamline that so that it's transparent and everyone can see what everyone is working on and we all feel connected to the work. But that has been a yeoman's work to get to that place. It has taken us quite a bit of time, and now it's being celebrated. Like, my goodness, what were we doing before? How are we trying to approach this in an Excel? When I came in, I had binders and binders on my desk, and I'm like, what's that? And they're like, oh, that's the strategic plan update from just the previous quarter. And I'm like, 5 binders? We can't go through that. No one's reading all of that information. So yeah, it was a great deal of work, and oftentimes unsung work as far as being a hero in it, and it is much more streamlined now. Yeah.
Internal communication, I think, is so critical to the success of plans. And I believe that people want to contribute and they want to be involved in the process. And not everybody, but I think if you hire the right people across campus, you're going to have people that are going to want to contribute to the success of whatever that initiative is and for the institution. However, I think if you've worked on plans in the past, and sometimes you don't know the things that are happening after that first, you do a survey and you have an event or activity and you're collecting that data, and there's not those regular check-ins to celebrate the success or we're going through a decision right now where we're discontinuing a couple sports. And how does this fit into the larger picture for the institution? So how are you evaluating what's successful on your campus, things that maybe aren't successful, and how these decisions are happening, and the role that all the stakeholders play helping shape those decisions? I just think for us, internal communication just is so important.
Yeah, and I think, Chuck, to that point, like the collaboration piece, the communication aspect of it, but also being willing to engage in those conversations that will create a bit of friction, but move the organization, the institution forward, have to be had. And they're a lot easier to have when everyone knows the end goal, when everyone understands the vision. It empowers that conversation to be had in a healthy way where it's, hey, here's the opportunity costs, but also the gain in moving us forward to that shared collective vision itself. And I think that's really well said. We do have a question here, and we've got 15, 20 minutes or so here left. And if there are questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. But I certainly have to ask this one if someone's dialing in at this time from Wales over in the UK. But one question here is, with limited resources, how do truly strategic institutions develop the maturity to stop activity? We can't just keep doing more and more, which is something we hear a lot here at Elate, but I'm curious if anyone's got a good way in which you've transitioned from just adding more and more to the plate to being more strategic in the way you develop your strategy and the execution of it.
I'll use our sports sponsorship as a perfect example here. We understand that enrollment is critical to the viability of the institution, but we evaluated several of our academic programs and sports athletic teams and across campus and continue to do that evaluation. But setting our goals and making sure that we have objectives that can meet those goals. And sometimes it's not always the strategic direction is to add more. It's to evaluate what do you have right now that's maybe not performing, to where it should, or that reaching that optimization level where it's still a viable part of your institution. So having those difficult conversations, but being able to share how this will help the institution as a whole is the difficult part. I think it definitely takes maturity, because it's easy to keep saying, yeah, let's do a little bit more here, a little bit more here. But I think with that comes the responsibility of also having awareness of what's not working currently.
Yeah, I'll call it institutional agility. And I think that we need to be agile in the way of definitely optimizing resources, making sure that anything that we're adding or taking away aligns to the mission, which is why it's critical, I think, when you start with strategic planning, not that the mission and vision are part of the plan itself, but it certainly lends itself to help drive where you're headed. In higher ed, we're always looking at the market and enrollment shifts, and we have to be agile in order to accommodate that. And then absolutely using the data. I might be a little bit biased because I oversee institutional research, but we need to have data-driven analytics to help us decide what needs to come and go. So it's having that institutional agility and being flexible.
Yeah, then one of the questions we ask ourselves is, to what extent is this necessary for our kind of differentiating characteristics? So, right. So, I mean, one of the things that's happening, you mentioned executive orders, but obviously there's the demographic cliff. There's, all kinds of known challenges that are in front of us. And so I think, universities really have to have a great understanding of the populations that are choosing them and why they're choosing them, and making sure that they're continuing to kind of excel at those areas. I think Melanie's question is a good one, in part because with shared governance, there isn't as if people can say stop doing this activity, start doing this activity. It is distributed in a very intentional and I would argue healthy way. But yet there are some things that organizations can do to foster certain activities, or to curtail certain activities. So I don't know that it's a straight binary as it relates to what's a priority.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to that question. One is the new stuff. So how do I feel comfortable saying no to a new ask or a new initiative? And part of that is transparency. So how do I ensure that others know what I am working on, or what my department is working on, so that when they make that ask, they don't assume that there's bandwidth there. I think if everyone knows what others are working on, it makes that easier. But the other piece is how do I stop something that might not be having the impact that I think it will have, and be comfortable with letting it go. And that's cultural, right? If our performance reviews are tied to us completing the activity, and not being comfortable stopping an activity that doesn't make it past the next stage gate, we're locking ourselves into patterns and behaviors and activities that don't drive impact. So I think it's both cultural and breaking down those silos and showing and celebrating the work that we're all doing.
That's awesome. And I feel like that's this shift you're speaking to it right now, Chris, which is there is a cultural element to it. If we're moving from activity driven, output driven, to really like seeking the shared result, the shared vision of the institution, there has to be, for a lot of institutions, that shift, that behavior change that needs to occur for that to come to fruition on the cultural side as much as anything else. One other question that we got here is aligning. It is aligning, and I think you're starting to touch on this, the mission and vision piece earlier, Jocelyn, but setting that vision, how often do you all revisit it at your institution? Is that something that comes and goes with new leadership? Or is that something that stays in place for your institution through different strategies and through different horizons?
We revisited it when we created this current plan, right? So it was 2023 to 2028. I don't know when they had done it previously. I was told that it had been done with the last iteration of the strategic plan, but they did not make any changes at that point in time. Again, I was coming in on the heels of the pandemic and this new plan getting underway. So I thought that it was the perfect time to really ensure that we were aligned with what all stakeholders would envision us to be, who they would like to see us as in the next 5 years. We did it then. It is certainly my intent in 2028 to revisit it again and to send out to stakeholders another poll to ask, are we still aligned with who we are, where we want to be, where we're headed? And to bring in some of those institutional priorities and make any changes. And our board of trustees and my president were very open and receptive to, if this is what the stakeholders are asking for, then these are the changes that we need to make.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jocelyn. As we wind up here, last 5 to 10 minutes, one of the things that we know to be true is that there is a sincere following of aspiring strategy and operations leaders that we work with at Elate and that follow our content, things along those lines. And so we always love to hear from folks that are in strategy and operations roles. How did you find yourself? What was your career trajectory? And I know some of the folks spoke to that in their introductions, maybe speaking to some misconceptions that folks might have about stepping into a strategy and ops role. A lot of folks believe it's just you go one rung at a time up the ladder. But what I've come to find is that most strategy leaders, it is not a just clear upward path. There's a lot of bends within that growth curve. So would love to hear if anybody has any advice or learnings that they've had stepping into their role and what that has looked like.
Well, I definitely never thought I'd be on a panel talking about strategy and operations, and really enjoyed the conversation today from my colleagues. And starting in athletics, I think what opened opportunities for myself in my career was raising my hand and volunteering and trying to be part of these larger discussions. Sometimes we're so focused on whatever role that we have within our institution, and we're trying to make that the best. But if you can take some time out of your day to give back and to think a little bit more holistically across campus, how your role impacts the institution, I think you'll see that it'll open up different opportunities for you to become involved in the decision-making process and strategy, and how you can align, the things that you believe that are important for the institution and create buy-in and create momentum and create change.
Yeah, I think, Brooks, you're right. And not just for this sort of career lattice, but really any career. People have this impression that it builds linearly. And I started out my career directly out of college in consulting. And for me, being put into new situations and having to come up to speed quickly has kind of stayed with me, and just in terms of an interest of understanding a new context, working with a new group of people. And so I think that's one of the things in this role that that I really appreciate. I think that I think for higher ed too, we can get trapped in thinking about the what it is that we do question, right? And the most obvious thing, right, is a set of degrees that we award to a set of students across but I think this is an exciting time where there's an opportunity to kind of, and a necessity in some cases for some institutions, to reconsider who do we serve, right? And, is it, how can we work with organizations and nonprofits differently? Like, what are we doing around our convening power? What are some different ways to contribute to the broader society? Like, these are things that you can not only do in a university, but do pretty powerfully in a university to kind of point the mission at a new use case. So that's what I particularly enjoy about this work.
So I think I've approached it a bit differently career-wise, and sort of looking at it less as climbing a ladder and more personal growth. So where can I insert myself to learn the most? Expose myself to new opportunities. And if I have the answer too many times, I'm in the wrong spot. Because then I'm just sort of riding the bike and not learning new skills. The other thing that I wish I knew early on was organizations don't design themselves in the same way. So my job title here is different than my job title at the university down the road. And that's that curiosity, explore on that, looking at what opportunities a role will provide you, and maybe even moving from sort of a role-based focus to a project-based focus can give you the personal growth that will allow you to create your own ladder and change who you are at the end of the moon. So that is thing. Higher ed, especially, two institutions are the same. So do your homework and see where those opportunities could take you.
My pathway was definitely not linear. I started as a healthcare practitioner. I was a clinician for 20 years. and went through some conferences, met some people who invited me to come and teach a class or two. A class or two turned into full-time faculty. And then I found myself meeting with the president of an institution and asking, how can I get into really changing the landscape of things? Because in healthcare, you need to be dynamic, you need to be flexible, you need to be ready to go. We have accrediting bodies as well. It's called JCO, and it scares everybody when they're coming in. And so I started asking those questions, and he laid out this pathway for me that be a faculty member for 10 years, and then move into being a department chair for 10 years, and then move into being a dean for 5 years. And I started calculating, my God, maybe by 80, I will have accomplished what it is that I'm seeking to do. And by then my ideas won't be innovative or fresh or any of that. So I started looking for an alternate way to use the skills that I had and make them transferable. And I think some of it is a little bit of a sales pitch, right? Because I had to sell the fact that I had transferable skills and I had acquired some knowledge from things that I had done in the past that could help me lend itself to really being impactful at an institution. And I'm fortunate that I had someone who was buying what I was selling at the time. And it's been a really good run here. And I've made some really positive changes at this institution. And I feel like my thumbprint is on all of it. And I feel really good about the work that I do in strategic planning.
That's incredible. And I think if there's one takeaway from everything y'all just shared, it is not just a step-by-step approach. There's a lot of dips along the way and a lot of exponential growth opportunity that comes from pursuing that personal growth more than just the title itself. We did get two additional questions. Rob, I think you sparked one in your response, and I'll get to that one here in a moment. The first one, which ties back to the earlier parts of our conversation, how do you get the data that you need to measure KPIs and metrics? Some of the more common ones like student retention, enrollment, et cetera, can be captured by some initiatives run by faculty. It can be difficult to capture even when reported on. So we talked about different departments, different divisions, but I'm just curious how you all get that level of insight or data to go about like empowering folks to make decisions.
Yeah, and I might have responded to that one. I think for us, that is a challenge, but the bigger challenge is sharing that information out and making sure that it's current. And I think systems like LAID and other systems that foster that access and transparency are crucial because it's pocketed, this information. And so making sure it's current and shared is our biggest interest.
I rely very heavily on my institutional research team. They also have access to the Elate platform, so they're able to sort of see in a narrative way what we're putting in. And I oftentimes tell them, you all have the numbers and I have the words, right? And we sort of marry that information together. And then when we have, some of our team meetings, like our enrollment management meeting or our finance and planning, right, for resource allocation, we're bringing that information out from institutional research and the narrative piece that we have in Elite.
And I'll just add, I think the ability to create so many different integrations in Elite, so many different areas and units are working in different systems, and to be able to integrate those systems with Elite to be able to illustrate or to have the data that you need to make those decisions and to make sure that you can measure outcomes. I think that's really a powerful tool right there.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, just asking, how can I help? Sometimes it's pairing a student with a faculty member to help them collect that information and make it available. And then two, it's culture, right? There are, you go into the medical profession, even airlines, people are very open about what they're doing, mistakes they've made, and how to solve them. And how can we take that mindset into higher ed where we all love solving problems? So looking at numbers that might not paint a good story is an opportunity to come together. It's not a shame and blame opportunity. It's really changing the culture, and then the numbers flow through and the hesitancy and sort of anxiety around sharing them goes away.
I love that. Last question we've got here is, what change is most impacting your strategic plan? And I think they mean, has there been a change over the last few months? Again, whether it's an executive order, whether it's just shifts within your own college or university's outlook, what change maybe at the macro sense, is most impacting your all's strategic plan here in the years to come?
I'd say how we're funding it. So we thought there would be tuition dollars that won't be there because of changing legislation. And so it doesn't mean we're not doing it. It means that one of our pillars to diversify our revenue sources has to be prioritized. And so that would be the biggest change is how we're funding it and changing where that revenue comes from.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really just a climate of uncertainty, right? I mean, if you're doing multi-year planning, trying to figure out, okay, when this is proposed or this is happening, but it might get rolled back. That can make it more difficult to make kind of long term bets.
Yeah, that's a good blanket one, Rob. I think there's enough uncertainty going around right now where that in and of itself can be a large portion of it, as well as where the dollar's coming in from and how do we diversify where those funds are being provided for. Chris, that's I'm assuming top of mind for everyone right now. So we're at the top of the hour. This has been incredible. Thank you all for taking the time to spend an hour with us to share for your institution. What does strategic planning look like? How is that coming to fruition? And sharing your insights. These are incredibly valuable for not just all the institutions that we work with, but for any strategy and operations leader. So thank you all for taking the time today and for all the great questions that we got in the chat. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. If anybody would like to reach out to our team to learn a little bit more about Elate, you can always go to golate.com, or you can reach out to me directly. Always happy to help and to take on those conversations. It's just brooks@golate.com. But again, thank you all for taking the time. Looking forward to diving in further and connecting with everyone here in the chat. Thanks all.
Hello and welcome everybody. Still trickling in here, but wanted to say thank you for joining. Excited to talk a little bit about strategic planning in higher ed and what that looks like with our awesome panel of guests. But in the next few minutes, why don't you put in the chat where you're calling in from, and maybe include, if you're with a university, what mascot your college or university has to represent. You can't be more boring than mine. I'm a little giant, otherwise known as a regular sized person. So as long as you have something more interesting than that, would love to hear it. The big name coming out first. Good to have you on, Erica.
Yeah. Chase, I'd say Little Giants is a pretty unique mascot name. Ours is just a panther, so nothing unique about a Hanover College Panther.
That's true. The big cats are pretty saturated. Tigers, panthers,
Yeah.
cougars. The Storm. That's cool. Lavon's with Harrisburg, the Storm. Oh, Jess here with UNC. Good to have you on. Eagles is another popular one, but Rebecca with CSULA is the Golden Eagle. Is that a real bird? I should know. We got the Bears, of course. Shakadra, good to have you on. I know we connected a few weeks back for our last webinar, so glad you're back with us for a second one. I was kind of hoping we would get a UC Santa Barbara banana slug, but maybe there's still a chance. And yeah, that is a real mascot, believe it or not. University of Colorado. A lynx, I think. I like it. Some mystery. Lynx that's a small cat. Still a cat. Awesome.